Conservative MP Larry Brock ruins Marco Mendocino and shuts down his blatant lies. Marco Mendocino insists that law enforcement has asked for the invocation of the Emergency Act, but you will see proof testimony included that led to his, quote, misunderstanding. Here's the clip.
5-minute block. We have Mr. Brock. Mr. Brock, please go ahead. You're on mute, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Minister, and thank you, witnesses, for attending today and your testimony. Minister, since the 1960s, law enforcement have safely and securely removed illegal blockades and protests across this country without resorting to the War Measures Act and in the last 30-40 years, the Emergencies Act. And a classic example of that, Minister, is what happened on the Ambassador Bridge in Windsor, which through effective police engagement, through effective containment, they not only were able to remove the protesters, but able to remove the blockages on the bridge. One day, literally one day before the invocation of the Emergencies Act. Law enforcement, sir, had all the necessary tools under the Criminal Code, the Ontario Highway Traffic Act, Ottawa bylaws, and court injunctions to end this illegal blockade. The Prime Minister confirmed this literally days before the invocation of the Emergencies Act. Before February 14th, 2022, Minister, you will agree that law enforcement had numerous powers to arrest under the Criminal Code. Firstly, starting with mischief under Section 430 of the Criminal Code, which is defined as willful acts to destroy or damage property, obstructing, interrupting, or interfering with the lawful use, enjoyment of property, or any person in the lawful use of that property. You'd agree with me, Minister, that was available to law enforcement before the 14th of February, 2022, correct?
Mr. Brock, I would agree that those authorities existed prior to the invocation of the Emergencies Act and that they were on the books and that they were available to police. But one
Thank you, Minister.
requires, no, if you'll permit me to finish, Mr. Brock.
It was one a yes or no question, Minister.
No.
You answered it. It was available. I've got 5 minutes. This is my time, Minister. You'll agree with me under Section 175, causing a disturbance. Activities
order,
such
Mr.
as
Chair.
Fighting, screaming, shouting, swearing.
Point of order, Mr. McKinnon.
Yes, Mr. Chair. The Bosch and Gagnon states that we have to be respectful of our witnesses, that we have to give them, it's not respectful to deny the minister a chance to respond to the question. So I would urge that.
Yes, your point is well taken. Let's proceed. Mr. Brock, back to you.
You'd agree with me, Minister, that causing a disturbance by the activities that I just described to you was available to law enforcement prior to the 14th of February, 2022 under Section 175.
Mr. Brock, what I was attempting to say was that you have to read the Emergencies Act, and it says that the law is effective at dealing with the national emergency. And my point to you and to all Canadians was that despite the presence of those laws, they were not effective at dealing with the illegal blockades and the occupation. And that was the advice that we were receiving from law enforcement.
Did yourself or anyone in the OPS request the invocation of the Emergency Act?
I did not make that request. I'm not aware of anybody else in the Ottawa Police Service who did.
And one of the main reasons why we invoked the Emergencies Act.
And my question to you, Minister, was it was available to law enforcement to effect an arrest for cause of disturbance for many of the activities complained by numerous residents in downtown Ottawa. Do you agree with me?
Mr. Brock, you're missing the point. The way that the law works is that it isn't just about whether or not the law is on the books, it's whether or not it's effective at dealing with the illegal blockades and the occupation.
Well, with respect, Minister, that is a law enforcement issue. The law was available for them to use. Whether they utilize it is a separate issue. My question to you is, that was available to law enforcement, yes or no?
Mr. Brock, you misunderstand the application of the law as well as how law enforcement interprets it. Their advice to the government was that the existing authorities were not effective at dealing with the illegal blockades and the occupation.
Well, law enforcement at Coots, Alberta had no problem invoking the criminal code to take care of those criminal activities, did they, without the Emergencies Act? You'd agree with me? They didn't need the Emergencies Act to arrest for the attempt murder or the other serious offenses, didn't they?
Mr. Brock, notwithstanding that, the tools that were afforded law enforcement were necessary for the purposes of addressing the illegal blockades and the occupation. And that advice came from very experienced law enforcement, including the Canadian Association of the Chiefs of Police, the Ontario Association of Chiefs of Police, the Canadian Association of Police, who represent the rank and file. Mr.
And
Brock,
we'll examine those individuals.
Mr. Brock,
one final question. Did the Ottawa Police make a request to the federal government to invoke the Emergencies Measures Act? Yes or no?
So we were involved in conversations with our partners and with the political ministries. We didn't make a direct request for the Emergencies Act.
We'll examine those.
You're on the other side of the singular opinion of all of those institutions.
Sure, Jan.
And we'll have an opportunity of questioning them.
Sorry, Commissioner Lucky, we've heard multiple times from ministers and others that the Emergency Act and the tools provided were specifically requested by police leadership. As a law enforcement agency with primacy for national security, did you ask the government or representatives for the invocation of the Emergencies Act?
No, there was never a question of requesting the Emergency Act. There was a question.
Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but I'm sorry. So you never asked for it. Do you know of any other police leadership that asked specifically the government for the invocation?
No, we actually reached out to various police agencies when there was talk about some of the authorities within that they were proposing. And of course, we were consulted because we were the ones who would be using those authorities. So we were consulted to see if they would be of any use to police in the context of the Freedom Convoy.
Also had numerous operations under the Highway Traffic Act dealing with parking, honking of horns, blocking intersections. All of that was available to law enforcement before the 14th of February, correct?
Thank you, Mr. Brock. Thank you, Mr. Brock. The time for that section has been used up. I'll now turn the floor over to Mr. Chang, who has 5 minutes in the second round. Mr. Chang, go ahead. The floor is yours.